This isn't a storybook. It's a manual, a how-to guide for identifying, prosecuting, and executing a very specific kind of enemy. In 1487, two men unleashed a book called the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, and over the next few centuries, it would be used to justify the torture and death of an estimated 40,000 to 50,000 people. The vast majority of them were women. So, how did a single book become one of the deadliest weapons in European history? What was inside its pages that gave people permission for a wave of brutality that swept an entire continent? To figure that out, we have to go back to a time of deep, deep fear and uncertainty. A world teetering on the edge of modernity but still shrouded in the superstitions of the past. Europe in the late 15th century was a place gripped by anxiety. The memory of the Black Death was still fresh, a haunting reminder of just how fragile life was. The Catholic Church, while powerful, felt its authority being challenged. And for many people, the devil wasn't just a concept, he was a real, tangible enemy working to corrupt the world. For centuries, the Church's official stance on witchcraft was surprisingly ambivalent. Early theologians often dismissed magic as pagan superstition, insisting that only God could actually bend the laws of nature. If you were accused of witchcraft, you might get a minor penance, but you weren't going to be burned at the stake. But by the 1400s, that was changing. A dangerous new idea started to take root. That witchcraft wasn't just some folk magic, but an organized, diabolical conspiracy. Witches, the argument went, weren't just confused souls. They were heretics who had made a pact with Satan himself. This twisted witchcraft from a simple crime into the highest form of treason. Treason against God. This growing paranoia just needed a catalyst, something official to turn scattered fears into a system of persecution. That spark came on December 5, 1484. Pope Innocent VIII, answering calls from Germany about how hard it was to prosecute witches, issued a papal bull called Summis Desiderantes Effectibus, desiring with supreme ardor. This document was a game-changer. It claimed that many people had given themselves over to devils, incubi, and succubi, and were using sorcery to kill infants, ruin crops, and torment people and animals. And, crucially, it gave two Dominican inquisitors total authority to correct, imprison, punish, and chastise anyone they suspected, steamrolling any local authorities who might get in their way. The stage was set for a hunt. The highest power in the Christian world had declared that witches were real, that they were dangerous, and that they had to be eliminated. All that was missing was a rule book for the hunters. And the two men authorized by the Pope were ready to write it. One of them, a man named Heinrich Kramer, had a personal score to settle. The story of the Malleus Maleficarum is really the story of its main author, Heinrich Kramer. Born around 1430, Kramer was a Dominican friar and an inquisitor for parts of Germany and Austria. By all accounts, he was tireless and devout, but he was also driven by obsession and a spectacular track record of failure. In 1484, Kramer tried to kick off a major witch trial in Tyrol, but it failed miserably. The local bishop shut him down and publicly called him senile and crazy. This humiliation was followed by another disaster in Innsbruck in 1485. Kramer became fixated on the alleged sex life of an accused woman, Helena Schuberin, and his bizarre questions got so out of hand that the rest of the tribunal suspended the trial and kicked him out of the city. Humiliated and furious, Kramer poured all his frustration into writing. The Malleus Maleficarum was his revenge project, an attempt to create a bulletproof justification for his methods, a tool to make sure no one could ever challenge him again. But Kramer knew he couldn't do it alone. His work needed credibility. So he found a co-author, Jacob Sprenger, a respected theologian and dean at the University of Cologne. Sprenger's name gave the book an air of authority it desperately needed. Here's the catch, though. Historians now debate how much Sprenger actually wrote, if anything. Evidence suggests he actually disliked Kramer and may have even forbidden him from preaching. In fact, Sprenger's name didn't even start appearing on the book until 1519, 24 years after he had died. It seems Kramer may have just slapped a respected name on his project to make it look good. Kramer's final move was a stroke of marketing genius. He took that papal bull from 1484 and put it right at the front of his book. Now, the bull was written 2 years before the book was even finished and wasn't a direct endorsement of the text. But putting it there created the powerful and totally misleading impression that the Malleus Maleficarum had the Pope's personal seal of approval. When Kramer actually showed his manuscript to the top theologians at the faculty of Cologne in 1487, they hated it. They condemned the book, saying its legal procedures were unethical and its ideas went against Catholic doctrine. But Kramer didn't care. He allegedly forged a letter of approval from the university, found a printer, and published his book anyway. The hammer of witches was now loose in the world. The Malleus Maleficarum wasn't just a book, it was a weapon, engineered in 3 parts to systematically tear down any skepticism and give witch hunters a clear, step-by-step guide. Part 1 is all about theology. It's designed to prove that witchcraft is absolutely real, and Kramer uses an insidious piece of logic. He argues that if you don't believe in witches, you're basically saying the devil has no power, which means you're questioning God's omnipotence. It was a brilliant trap. Disbelief in witches became proof that you, yourself, were a heretic. The book states that witchcraft requires 3 things: the witch's evil intent, the devil's help, and God's permission. Part 2 is where the book gets truly terrifying and reveals its deep-seated hatred of women. Kramer asks a simple question: why is it that this heresy is found more in women than in men? His answer is a venomous tirade. Women, he claims, are more carnal, more impressionable, and weaker in faith. He even does this twisted wordplay, claiming the Latin word for woman, femina, comes from fe and minus, meaning less faith. He writes, "All wickedness is but little to the wickedness of a woman." And, quoting a classical philosopher, "When a woman thinks alone, she thinks evil." He directly connects witchcraft to female sexuality, a theme we know Kramer was obsessed with. It wasn't just that witches could be women. The Malleus argued that the archetypal witch was a woman. This set the stage for the gendered slaughter that would follow. Part 3 is the legal heart of the book, a horrifyingly practical guide for judges and inquisitors on how to conduct a witch trial. It lays out everything, from gathering accusations to interrogating witnesses, and, most importantly, using torture to get a confession. The rules were rigged for conviction from the start. The accused usually didn't get a defense lawyer, and a neighbor's gossip was considered valid evidence. Perhaps most chillingly, the book advises that if a woman doesn't cry during her trial, it's proof she's a witch. Any confession made under torture had to be freely repeated afterward. If the victim recanted, the torture could just start all over again. With the crime being heresy against God, the final sentence was almost always death. With this book, Kramer had created the perfect, inescapable trap. It defined the crime, identified the criminal, and laid out a legal process where accusation was basically a death sentence. The publication of the Malleus Maleficarum didn't start the fire, but it was like pouring gasoline on the embers. Over the next 2 centuries, the book went through at least 28 editions, and in some parts of Europe it was a bestseller, second only to the Bible. Its influence, though initially rejected by parts of the Church, seeped into the legal systems of both Catholic and Protestant lands. The book's real terror was in how it was used. It turned neighborly spats, personal grudges, and social anxieties into matters of life and death. If a crop failed or a child got sick, you could now blame someone, often a poor, elderly woman or a local midwife living on the fringes of society. The Malleus gave authorities the framework to turn a suspicion into a death sentence. The period between roughly 1560 and 1660 saw the witch hunting craze hit its peak. While it's hard to get precise numbers, modern scholars estimate that somewhere between 40,000 and 50,000 people were executed for witchcraft. The old stories of millions of victims are a myth, but the reality is still horrific. And thanks to the ideology championed by Kramer's book, an estimated 75 to 80% of them were women. The hunts weren't the same everywhere. Kramer's homeland, Germany, became the absolute epicenter of the craze, accounting for a huge number of trials and executions. By contrast, Spain and Italy saw far fewer executions, partly because the Central Roman Inquisition was more skeptical and kept local courts in check. The trials themselves were spectacles of hysteria. The torture methods recommended in the Malleus, like thumbscrews and sleep deprivation, were brutally effective at getting confessions. Under that kind of pain, people would confess to anything, flying on broomsticks, having relations with the devil, and they would name other people, which created a chain reaction of accusations that could tear entire communities apart. The echoes of the Malleus reached all the way to the American colonies. The infamous Salem witch trials of 1692 happened long after the book was published. But the legal madness, admitting spectral evidence, the focus on female suspects, and the presumption of guilt, was straight out of the playbook the Malleus Maleficarum helped write. Heinrich Kramer's book had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. It took his personal obsessions and turned them into a system of lethal persecution that allowed fear to run wild, sending tens of thousands of innocent people to their deaths. So, what stopped it? Just like the hunts didn't start overnight, they didn't end suddenly either. It was a slow, gradual decline through the late 17th and early 18th centuries. A big part of it was growing skepticism among the educated and powerful. As the hunts spiraled out of control, the accusations started hitting prosperous citizens, not just the poor and outcast. Suddenly, leaders were forced to take a closer look and question if evidence gotten through torture was really valid. At the same time, the world was changing. The brutal religious wars were fading, and the Enlightenment was dawning, bringing with it a new emphasis on reason and scientific inquiry. Natural events that were once blamed on a witch could now be explained by science. By the early 18th century, the legal system that supported witch trials was being dismantled. Torture was abolished in many places, and laws decriminalizing witchcraft were passed. The last official execution for witchcraft in Europe happened in Switzerland in 1782, when a woman named Anna Goldie was beheaded. Today, we study the Malleus Maleficarum. Not as a guide, but as a historical artifact, a chilling testament to the dangers of fanaticism, mass hysteria, and institutionalized persecution. It's a powerful example of how a single text, by wrapping itself in religious authority and legal procedure, can be used to justify violence against a specific group. It's ironic. Heinrich Kramer was dismissed as a failure and a crank by many in his own time. But his personal book of hate went on to have a monstrously successful and deadly impact on the world. The story of the Malleus Maleficarum is a powerful reminder of how dangerous a single idea can be. It shows how one man's personal grudge, when given the power of the printing press and dressed up in the language of religious duty, could justify unimaginable suffering. It gave paranoia a playbook and hatred a legal framework, leading to the deaths of an estimated 50,000 people. It's a stark warning that the most dangerous demons aren't the ones in supernatural stories. They're the ones that live inside the human heart: fear, hatred, and intolerance. The hammer of witches may be a relic of a bygone era, but the lessons from its blood-soaked pages remain as urgent today as they were 5 centuries ago. If you found this look into a dark corner of history interesting, be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that have shaped our world. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, so please share them in the comments below. Thank you for watching.